Hi everyone, I'm Kristen. I'm an educator and the outreach coordinator for the North Carolina Aquarium at Fort Fisher. Thank you so much for checking out our aquarium life cycles video. You know, every living thing has a life cycle, but not every life cycle looks the same. So we are going to break down exactly what is a life cycle, and then we're going to look a little more closely at some of our amazing aquarium animals and what makes their life cycles unique. So let's start with a life cycle. What exactly is it? Well, in the most simplest terms, it is a lifetime, right? So there's a beginning, there's an end, and then there are things that happen along the way throughout an individual's life. So let's start at the beginning. That's birth, right? Now, I've already told you that not every life cycle is the same. And we can see that right here at the beginning. For some animals, birth is a live birth. For others, it's hatching from an egg. So there are going to be differences dependent upon the individual animal species. But then the next stage in the cycle is growth. And this is where we see the greatest amount of diversity in life cycles. For some individuals, when they're born, they basically look like smaller versions of what they will look like as an adult. For other animals, they look nothing like they will look when they're fully grown. In fact, for some of those animals, their bodies don't function the same as they will when they're fully grown. So for animals that go through this major change of growth, where they don't look the same, they don't even function the same, that is a process that we call metamorphosis. Can you think of any animals that experience metamorphosis in their life cycle? Well, we're actually going to meet a couple today. The next stage is adulthood. Now, dependent upon the animal, adults might have different names, right? So if you think about a chicken, baby chickens are called chicks. As adults, it might be a hen if they're female, or it might be a rooster if they're male. So there are different names that may be associated with the stages, but as a general term, it's when they have reached the point at which they can reproduce. Reproduction is that stage that occurs once an animal has become an adult. Now, for wild animals especially, this stage of reproduction is critically important. Have you ever heard of an endangered or threatened species? Well, what this means is that these animal populations are in decline. There are fewer individuals who are available to reproduce to create future generations of that species. Now, what happens when there are not enough individuals to reproduce to continue that animal species? Well, that's what's called extinction, right? And so this is something that we at the aquarium are really fighting against. We don't want to see extinction happening. So thank you for tuning into our videos and learning about some of our amazing animals. The more we know about them, the better we're able to support and conserve them. So again, this stage of reproduction is critically important to our wild animals. Now, every life and every cycle is going to have a beginning and there has to be an end. So of course, the end of a life cycle is death. Now, my favorite way of thinking about a life cycle is not really in a circle like we're often taught. I like to think of it more like a spring or a slinky. So remember that stage of reproduction? Every time an adult has a successful reproduction and there are new generations, it adds another circle to that family, right? So the more circles you have, the stronger that population of that animal. So they all link together to form a family. And if you think of them as individual circles, they create a slinky. All right, how are we feeling about a life cycle? Feeling pretty good? All right, so let's start out simple. Let's meet an aquarium animal with a pretty basic life cycle. There we go. This is a fish that is very special to the North Carolina aquariums. You might recognize it if you can see my shirt. This is the Atlantic spadefish. So let's take a closer look at what happens in the life cycle of the spadefish. So clearly, these fish hatch from eggs, and then they're going to grow a little bit, and they're just small fish. Do you know what a baby fish is called? They're called fry. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a little bit funny. But regardless, these fry, these baby fish, they're going to continue to grow, right? Until they become adult fish. And then, of course, there's that stage of reproduction, and we have more eggs. So this particular life cycle is pretty basic. Does the Atlantic spadefish go through a metamorphosis? No, they don't. So this is one of those examples where the babies just look like smaller versions of their parents. Now, one thing that does change, which you can probably see in the pictures before you, the coloration is going to change a little bit, right? So these animals might have changes in their colors, might have changes in their patterns, but they are not going through metamorphosis. They're functioning the same. All right, let's try another animal. What about turtles? How do you feel about the turtle life cycle? Do you feel pretty confident about it? Well, let's check it out. We're going to look specifically at sea turtles. So one of the things that's really unique about turtles, and sea turtles in particular, is that these animals always have to lay their eggs on land. But wait a minute, where do sea turtles live? They live in the ocean, right? So sea turtles have to return to the beaches all around the world to lay their eggs annually. This always happens during the summer, and we have some amazing volunteers who go out and look for these nests and protect them. Because remember, I was describing endangerment and threatened before? All 7 species of sea turtles in the world are either endangered or threatened. They need that extra protection. So let's look a little closer. Our sea turtle moms come to the beaches. They're going to lay their eggs, right? Do you know how many eggs a sea turtle can lay? It can be anywhere between 75 to about 200. That's kind of crazy, right? Imagine 200 brothers and sisters. Well, the average for the loggerhead species, which is our most common in North Carolina, is about 120 eggs. So those eggs are going to hatch, and a baby sea turtle is called a hatchling. They're typically about 2 inches long, or I like to think of it, they're kind of the length of my finger, all right? So they're going to be very small, and they've got a lot of growing to do. Did you know that sea turtles are the largest turtles in the world? In fact, the largest turtle in the world can reach lengths between 6 and 8 feet long. So to go from finger size to 8 feet, that is a lot of growing. So those hatchlings grow into adults, and then those adults will return back to the beaches to reproduce again. Now, what do you think is the expected lifetime for a sea turtle? The trouble is we don't exactly know. The best guess is that it could be at least 100 years. One of the really cool research projects that's going on right now about sea turtles has aged an individual nesting mother to be at least 60 years old. Guys, that's really exciting. Not just that she survived that long, but that we know about it from the research being done. So how do we feel about the turtle life cycle? That wasn't too difficult, right? Let's try another animal. What about amphibians? Well, amphibians aren't just an animal, right? It is a group of animals. And you can see pictures here of some of our most common amphibians in North Carolina. We have toads, we have frogs, salamanders, and newts. That's right, newts. We do have newts in North Carolina. Raise your hand if you've ever seen one. Okay, not many of us. That's not surprising. Newts like to hide, and they will often be found in fresh water. All right, so let's go a little further. Let's learn about the amphibian life cycle. Okay, so here we have some pictures, and we're going to start at the top with that little pile of eyeballs. No, those are eggs, right? But they do sort of look like eyeballs. And amphibians, just like turtles, start their lives as eggs. Now, what happens when they hatch? I bet you know this one. We have tadpoles, right? Now, I want to pause right there. Do frogs and toads and salamanders, do they look the same as tadpoles? No, they don't, right? So this is one of those groups of animals that are going to experience metamorphosis. These amphibians will hatch from their eggs. They're little tadpoles that have to live in fresh water. Their mobility comes from this really cool long tail, but as they grow, they're going to change. And not only do they change in appearance, they're going to change in function and in name. So as these tadpoles are growing, some of the first things that's going to happen, they'll grow back legs. They'll also grow front legs. And as they're growing legs, they're going to become more mobile. They can move from water to land. So one of the changes that happens that's not so obvious, tadpoles are going to lose their gills that help them breathe underwater, and they're going to develop lungs that help them to breathe air. Now, as you can see, their name changes, right? They go from being tadpoles to polywogs. Has anyone ever heard of a polywog? Well, it's a term that's used at kind of this mid-stage in their growth or their metamorphosis, where they're not quite tadpoles anymore because they have legs, but they're not frogs yet because they still have a tail. So it's a little bit of this awkward stage. I like to think of it as kind of like the teenage years, right? So they are a little bit awkward. They have a unique name to kind of set them apart from these other stages. As these polywogs continue to grow through their metamorphosis, they are going to lose that tail. Now, the next stage in their metamorphosis is actually pretty cool. As you can see here, they're called toadlets, froglets, or Fs. Now, I would like for you to give me a thumbs up. I'm going to take your word for it that you're doing it. Take a closer look at your thumbnail. Do you see how small that is? That is the size of these froglets or toadlets. They're very, very small. So they aren't quite adults yet, right? They're still very small, but they have completed their metamorphosis. At this stage, they look like the adults, but they haven't quite fully grown to be an adult. Make sense? Awesome. Now, what becomes of those froglets and toadlets? They're going to continue to grow. And once they become adults, reproduction, you got it. So again, those stages are the same, even if they don't look the same. All right, we have our adult stage, and we have a whole new pile of eyeballs. Just kidding. I really do think they look like eyeballs, though. Let's try another animal. What about moon jellies? Now, some of you might be saying, that's a jellyfish, Kristen. Well, I have to be honest with you. At the aquarium, and really pretty commonly in my line of work of environmental education, we don't like to call these jellyfish because it confuses people. These are not fish. So we simply call them jellies. And this particular species you're seeing is called a moon jelly. Pretty cool, right? All right, now moon jellies and other jellyfish, they are very simple animals. They don't have brains, they don't have hearts, so they don't have blood, they don't even have bones, right? So they're very simple, but they have very complicated life cycles. If you need to buckle up, go ahead and do that now, because it might get bumpy from here. Let's dive in. So the moon jelly life cycle. The adult form of a moon jelly is called a medusa. You may have heard that word before, Greek mythology, the lady with the snakes for hair, right? So a medusa with the tentacles and with the oral arms that extend underneath the body or the bill, that's where the name Medusa comes from. It sort of looks like if you turned the Greek mythology lady upside down. So the Medusa is the adult, and the females will lay their eggs into the open ocean. How many eggs do you think the mama jellies will lay? It could be thousands. Wait a minute. Did you guys know that jellies, some of them, can sting? And just one mama can lay thousands of eggs? That's a little bit intimidating, isn't it? Stay tuned. There's good news. So the female lays those eggs, And those eggs begin to change right away. They have to have a way of kind of moving throughout the water. At this stage, they're called planula. And as you can see from our picture, they sort of look hairy, right? Well, they have cilia that help them to move throughout the water. Those little cilia whip around and they keep that egg or that planula moving. Now, eventually, that planula is going to land on a solid surface. Now, the crazy part is it could land on something beneath it. It could bump into something, or it could even float up to something. Wherever it lands, it will stick. They sort of make their own glue, and they stick in that one spot while they continue to grow. And at this stage, they're called a polyp. The job of a polyp is actually pretty simple. They're supposed to grow, and they grow because they eat. Now, if you're looking at this image, there's something that's actually missing from this polyp. There are going to be these tiny little strands that grow up away from the polyp, and their job is to sway through the water. Any guesses what those might be? Think about the body of a jelly. Those are tentacles, right? So the tentacles are going to catch food, and they're going to pull that food down into the mouth of the polyp, which will actually be on the top. So the polyps are growing, and they do something kind of cool, or maybe weird. It depends on your perception. They can actually make copies or twins of themselves. That would be amazing, right? Imagine all the work we could get done if there were two of us. I'm just kidding. So they are going to make a copy or a clone or a twin of themselves, and then they continue to grow. But growing looks a little different at this point. If you notice in the image, they sort of start to create layers, or buds, as they're commonly called. This process of budding or separating into layers is called strobilation. And that very top layer, that top bud, will actually release off of the polyp into the water, and it's called an ephyra. Take a look at the ephyra in the image. Does it sort of look like mom? Yeah, so once again, this is an example of a life cycle that's going to include metamorphosis, but they reach a stage where they've ended metamorphosis and they're just a smaller version of their adult form. So what becomes of the ephyra? They're going to continue to eat, they're going to continue to grow, they will become adult medusas, and those medusas, of course, reproduction. You got it. Awesome job. So here is a closer look at what this process of strobilation looks like in real life. You can see the tentacles of the polyps. You can even see that some of the polyps have created their twins. And then there's that budding stage where they are strobilating into different layers. And at the very end, there's an ephyra that's ready to release into the water. Now, I mentioned to you before that an individual female can have thousands of eggs. And we all, I think, agreed that that could be a little intimidating. Well, guess what? Just like a life cycle can come full circle, so do our aquarium animal life cycles. But in some ways, they're linked. These jellies, they make lots of new generations of jellies. But do you remember that sea turtle that we talked about at the beginning? Sea turtles eat jellies. So jellies are a big part of the growth of many species of sea turtles. Isn't that kind of cool how they're all linked together? That's one of my favorite things about nature. We get to look at them closer, understand them better, and then we get to see how it's all connected. There is one catch to this connection of sea turtles eating jellies. Unfortunately, sometimes sea turtles encounter things in the ocean that they think are jellies, but they're not. Any guesses? Yeah, it's plastics. Now, that could be in the form of a plastic bag, or it could be some sort of plastic wrap, or it may even be a balloon. And these items look like jellies, especially in the water. Now, sea turtles are smart, but they are a unique type of smart. They are driven by instinct. So if it looks like food and they find it where their food is supposed to be, then they assume that it must be food. They don't go grocery shopping. They don't buy products wrapped in plastic. And they certainly, well, I don't think they have any turtle parties, so they probably don't have any use for balloons either. So if they see these things, they just don't know that it's not food. So this really isn't a turtle problem, is it? It's a people problem. All of those things that they get confused by come from us. And it's trash by the time it gets to the ocean. So it sounds like a really big problem, a difficult problem to solve. It's really not. It's just going to take a long time. The easiest solution to this plastic problem in the ocean is we've just got to make less trash. So if there are things that are only intended to be used once, then maybe we can replace them with things that we can use over and over and over, or reuse, right? So we want to reduce our usage of things that we only use one time, and we want to find things that we can reuse as much as possible. And if we're reusing things, then we're not throwing as much trash away. So it's really a win-win. We're not making trash. The turtles aren't finding it. They aren't getting confused by it. So what can you choose to reuse? That's how I approach my life. I look at everything that I use and I ask myself, is this something that I can replace instead of throw away? And if I can, I do. I want to make as little trash as possible. Do you think you can do it too? I bet you can, but it's all about that choice. So, friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning into our video. I hope you had fun. I really hope you learned something, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you.